Today on the Locked On Blues podcast, I'm going to be covering all of the various news around the NHL, starting with the Colorado Avalanche, their sweep over the Edmonton Oilers, and what that means for the St. Louis Blues, as so far they're the only team that has beat Colorado postseason, as Colorado looks poised to make a real run for the Stanley Cup. It should be a fun series for them in that Stanley Cup final, but also, it's got to mean well for the Blues, the fact that they 3 wins against them. So I'm going to be talking about that, plus the other series, talking about Tampa Bay Lightning, bringing it back to 2 games to 1. Again, also be talking about some other various news, including Bruce Cassidy getting fired by the Boston Bruins. This should be a busy episode. Fun.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for daily Blues content. I'm your host, Josh Hyman, and like I said, got a busy episode for you guys today. Not Blues news, but a lot going on. Game 4, the Colorado Avalanche advanced to the Stanley Cup final. So I'm going to be talking about that. Get everyone out there, because we are free and available on all podcast platforms. So before I get into anything, obviously my background's a little different. Audience, I am at home now. My family, so that's why the jerseys aren't behind me. So it's going to look a little different here for about 2 weeks. Different just because the room's a little bigger. Starting out with editing on my own for the first time. So hopefully, it's going enjoying. That being said, do got a busy episode to talk about. And the first thing I do want to get into is the Colorado Avalanche dominating the Edmonton Oilers 4 games. Edmonton never really had a chance. I mean, they had a back and forth game last night, obviously, but kind of stormed back from that 4-2 deficit. It was pretty much set in stone what was going to happen. After game 1 of the Blues series, I think it was, I said Colorado might go 16-2. And honestly, I wasn't sure if those 2 wins were going to come from the St. Louis Blues at that time. I figured it would come in the Stanley Cup final against the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, obviously, I don't the Lightning if that's what it turns out to be. Same thing with the Rangers. I think the Rangers would give them a tough time, but Colorado was really looking like the team. It's difficult because their goaltending has been so poor. Like last night's game, I feel like is a perfect example. Goals or 6 goals, and it still wasn't enough to win handedly. And I think you do that against a team like the Tampa Bay as much as you would against a team like the Edmonton Oilers. So it could really come to Colorado Avalanche and match up against either the New York Rangers or the Tampa Bay Lightning. You're running into probably the best goaltender you've seen in the playoffs, because I honestly think that Vasilevsky and Shesterkin were 1 and 2 the entire playoffs, just in terms of best goaltenders. So it's going to be tougher in that sense, but with the way that their offense is playing, the way that their offense is humming along, they're going to be really tough to beat. Obviously, Nazem Kadri being out with that thumb injury is going to hurt them. He provided a really good secondary scoring punch, pretty much single-handedly won that game against the Blues after, all that controversy went down. And we saw what type of locked in like that, and he had himself a hat trick. And that, like I said, really won Colorado the game. So, scoring piece for the Avalanche, they're going to need guys to step up. Lehkonen has, I think, two straight series clinching goals, actually. So I don't remember what the statistic was, but he's been really good scoring that game winner. Which, first of all, I do want to talk. It was a high stick. In all honesty, shot came in. Guy knocked down the puck, rebounded off the goalie, which if you score off the deflection, it's got to be above the crossbar. But if it's just knocking it down into the air and then hitting it again, it's got to be above the shoulders. And it looked like it was above the shoulders there. But whatever, Colorado probably deserved of how they did it. So yeah, Avalanche sweep the Edmonton Oilers, and as of right now, the St. Louis Blues are the only team to beat the Avalanche in the playoffs, and they looked like a team that it went to 6 games, but it could have very easily gone to 7 with the Blues, losing in the final few. Really crushing way to lose. Obviously, they were getting outplayed for a majority of that game and a majority of that series, but could have pushed it to 7 games. And I think the sentiment is true that series was essentially the Western Conference. The Blues somehow, manage a way to sneak past they would have a much easier time with a team like the pretty well. The really only chance in that series was the goaltending of the Avalanche, and it gave them a chance in that game. They towards the end there, maybe it was just one, maybe it was just a 5-4 lead that I'm thinking of, but still, they had a chance to put them away, and Edmonton came down. So Edmonton, just like St. Louis, kind of had every chance to at least win that game. So yeah, who knows? Made it out. Obviously, they didn't. So hindsight is 2020. It's got to feel good to be a St. Louis Blues fan after watching Colorado steamroll their playoffs. That being said, though, they're going to have a tough matchup in the Stanley Cup on who they match up with, either the New York Rangers or the Tampa Bay. In the second segment, but before I get into that, I want to tell you guys about our good friends. Now, I'll tell you guys about the flavors all the time, but consistently one of my favorite chocolate. And I love me a nice chewy chocolate. How about this? How about a caramel brownie with caramel? So what if I told you can have all that chewy chocolatey goodness plus 17 grams of protein, because caramel brownie Built Bars are available fast because they're a fan favorite. Plus the macros are unreal. 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, and only 4 grams of sugar. A regular brownie with Built, a heartbeat. Best part, as with every Built product, caramel brownies are covered in 100% real chocolate. With Built, you don't have to sacrifice tasty for healthy. There's a million reasons why you should try Built Bars, but for now, brownie will rock your understatement. So go to Built.com, use promo code % off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com, and I'll be right back with the second half of today's episode. So, talked about the West Series a little bit and the implications for the St. Louis Blues. Now I want to go out east, or I guess not out east, because whatever. The Tampa themselves in a 2-1 hole against the New York Rangers. However, it looked like the better team in that game. Rangers took a 2-0 lead at one point. I think they had a 2-0 lead in the third period, in the second period, but whatever. They had a 2-0 lead in that game. Flipped the switch like they can do and won the game pretty handily. I've said this many times. I think the New York Rangers are built like a traditional. I think that they have the offense, the defense, and the goaltending necessary to win a cup in a lot of NHL seasons. However, with the Tampa Bay Lightning, sometimes it just doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how well you play. It doesn't matter, who you've got on your first line or are just better. The Tampa Bay Lightning are the deepest team in the league. They also have high-end talent in the league. Shortcomings early in this series is probably the best goal. It might be the best planet. Victor Hedman, defenseman on the planet. Obviously Nikita Kucherov, Steven Stamkos. It's just only so much you can do against a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning. Hockey and still lose, and I don't want to say the game 3, but 2-0 with a chance to extend the series to 3-0 is a really good spot to be in. And you could say that the Rangers played themselves out of that game. I think Tampa back-to-back Stanley Cup winning team can do, and just willed themselves back into that game. And missed opportunity for the Rangers. I think taking a 3-0 lead is obviously I'm not saying anything saying that a 3-0 lead in the Eastern Conference Final is a pretty darn good spot to be in. But looking back, heading 2-1, Tampa's got to be feeling pretty good, especially considering how they fought back. And game 1 of the series, Tampa was rusty. They hadn't played in they lost 6-2. And then game 2, New York kind of just stole with 3. But then, game 3, New York and just Tampa just did what best team in the NHL can do and willed themselves. A good team is winning games that they should have lost. And New York probably did so game 2. I don't know if they should have lost game 2, but they definitely stole the way that they were playing early and the way that New York was kind of shutting them down early. Should have lost that game. But when you're the Tampa Bay Lightning and you have the scoring thing that they have, it's pretty difficult to put that team away 3 games in a row. And they, most recent game. That being said, by the time you guys listen to this episode, and check time they're playing tonight, be null and void. Let's see. Yeah, they played tonight at 8, so maybe you guys will be hearing this a little bit earlier, but still, I think people are sleeping on the New York Rangers a little bit in the series. I think people were like, "Oh, Tampa." And Tampa's a really good team, and they had a ridiculous round to the Panthers. But they did go to 7 games in round 1 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And round 1 is very difficult for them. So I don't know if anyone was really doubting Tampa too much at any point in that series, but still, they aren't perfect. That they have weaknesses and vulnerabilities that can be exploited. With the New York Rangers are making adjustments and playing well. Obviously game 1, they pounced on a sloppy looking Tampa team, but Tampa hasn't looked sloppy like that since they got swept by the Columbus Blue Jackets 3 years ago. So look, I mean, anything is possible. The New York Rangers series being up 2-1, but you gotta be a little nervous if you're a Rangers fan right now, knowing that you had the opportunity to go up 3-0, and now all of a sudden Tampa's 1 win away from evening this series. Tampa evens this series at 2 games apiece. I wouldn't be surprised to see New York not win another game, just because that's how good Tampa can be. And when Tampa smells blood in the water, they're going to just put you away like that. So, I mean, I'm anticipating a pretty good game tonight and a pretty good remainder of the series. I wouldn't be surprised to see this go 7. I think the Rangers are a better team than in terms of depth, in terms of just being a complete team. So with that, Toronto can push Tampa to 7. I think New York can do the same. You're going to have to get wins like you got in game 2. You're not going to put up 6 goals on Tampa again, most likely. Excuse me. Not going to put up 6 goals on Tampa again, most likely. Hadn't played in a long time, so you're not gonna kind of get a cakewalk win. Fight tooth and nail series, much less 2 more wins in this series. However, I think the Rangers are capable of that. I think the Rangers have a lot of depth. Chris Kreider's had his best year of his career by far, almost doubled his previous career high in goals. Artemi Panarin's obviously awesome. Philip Hedl is amazing. Keandre Miller on a lot of depth. And like I said, in any other year where they weren't matched up against a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning, I think the New York Rangers would be a pretty good cup-winning team. I like what they would match up against the Colorado Avalanche. Obviously, the offense of Colorado is ridiculous, but when you have a guy like Igor Shesterkin in between your pipes, you can steal a game pretty easily. And when that he can do that in the playoffs, he's had a really, really strong playoffs. Struggles in round 1. So I think New York would have a good chance against Colorado. Obviously, they have to get there first, and I'm looking forward to it. It's nice to know that Tampa isn't perfect and they aren't, and just steamroll to them like Colorado did. It would be pretty boring. I think the New York Rangers were I think it was 10 minutes left in the second when they were up 2 series, 3-0, which would have been a little boring for the conference finals. Now all of a sudden, you forward to that. That being said, though, in this third and final, up some other various NHL news. Majority is, I know it's a little weird, but I think that's a pretty big move. And I don't know, nobody getting into that. Kind of shocked the world, made some big headlines yesterday, announcing that they were dismissing Bruce Cassidy, which is one of the longer tenured coaches in the NHL. But he had won Coach of the Year, I think 2 years ago, 3 years, something like that. And a lot of people's opinion, did the best he could with that Bruins roster. And this is doesn't say that, growing up in Massachusetts, Bruins fans a lot, their ownership is, and I think it just goes to highlight how nicely the Blues do. Owners that are willing to go out of their own pocket for Ryan O'Reilly's bonus, which is the only reason Ryan O'Reilly, and consistently be able to, go out and spend right up to the cap and do what it takes to make the fans happy first over, anything else. And right now, the only reason that I think is a really, really good coach, and a coach that achieved with the roster that they were given, is because ownership was basically want to accept responsibility for roster that was put in front of them. Just a few years off of a Stanley Cup appearance, as we all remember, and their roster hasn't changed for the better much since. Obviously, player Charlie Coyle is a good player. They've added some good pieces, but at the same time, they were just put in such a spot this year due to Don Sweeney not putting a good roster in front of them. And Bruce Cassidy did the best he could with that roster, in my opinion, but still was fired. Maybe not this year, but I don't know. Let's say back in 2019, the Blues don't win this, and the roster is good, not great, and then Craig Berube gets fired. We'd be very fans. We'd say, okay, Berube had nothing to do with it, and that's sort of, I think, where Bruins fans are at right now, where Bruce Cassidy has kind of just been the scapegoat, and that of a bit of a toxic organization. Don't deserve to be blamed, not taking responsibility, not taking ownership, and not just making the necessary changes to make yourself a better hockey. And again, that's why I want to stress, I think the Blues ownership in NHL, they said it before, their own pocket for Ryan O'Reilly and give him his signing bonus. That trade would not have happened going to pay Ryan O'Reilly signing bonus. And, obviously it happened. The GM too. I think Doug Armstrong is one of the better GMs in the league. He consistently constructs a really, really strong roster. And this year, he honestly in line with what Craig Berube wanted, and Craig Berube's coaching style. And the Kings were definitely, the offense sort of got itself figured out. Was able to kind of work with what he had, and it was between ownership, general management. And I think that that's such an important balance to have in the NHL. Is a GM who are sort of on the, one of them is going to have their own preferences. I think if it were up to Craig Berube, they probably would have gone for a little bit more of a physical two-way team. Or up to Doug Armstrong, they would have even maybe won skill game. So, but the thing is, everyone was happy at the end. So the Blues got knocked out in round 2, and that's disappointing. But when I think you absolutely have to chalk it up to a success, and that is because they did lose in the second round, but they lost in the second round to the Western Conference champion, Colorado Avalanche. So, you can't be too upset about that. And that compromise is something that's important. And right now, I'm bad for Bruins fans because they're not getting that compromise. They're getting ownership kind of just strong-arming their way. We need a fall guy for the way that this season went. We need someone to, come in and shake it up. And now all of a sudden they're without a coach. And I can guarantee you that the next coach that they hire will not be as good as, unless it's Barry Trotz. There's not a coach out there that's better than Bruce Cassidy. Maybe I'll look like a dummy when the Bruins 60 games next year with some other head coach without Bergeron, maybe not without Bray, but they're going to be without Marchand till December. They're going to be without Charlie McAvoy till December, and they're going to be having a fresh head coach. And we know how having a fresh head coach, as Blues fans, we know that having a fresh head coach can have its bumps. Craig Berube didn't really find success in the season, and in Boston is just very frustrating, I feel like, for Bruins fans, because it felt like something that didn't necessarily need to happen. It felt like anything this year for the Bruins, and they're on their way out. At least let Cassidy finish up that core, because now you got a coach coming in, and what's be a transition year, trying to find some young talent to take the reins. Allen and Marchand eventually retire the Bruins, because we don't know if Bergeron's going to come back, or to not have your ownership and your coaching on the same page. Obviously, that's what. But I just can agree that Bruce Cassidy did not deserve to be fired. And I don't know. It's a big tangent. I know I just spent 5 minutes, 6 minutes talking about the Boston Bruins, but it's sort of just to highlight, I think, how it's easy to take it for granted when you have a really good general manager like the St. Louis Blues do, because the Blues, I'd be very surprised if the Blues themselves in that position where they underachieved, and that was, Bruins underachieved because of their roster. But instead of going out and maybe as drastic as firing your GM, or at least trying to reconstruct the roster first, they just immediately go and fire their head coach, who had, given them a lot of success over the last 5-6 years. It's going to be a very interesting offseason, including, coaching changes, the coaching and all that stuff, trades. It's going to be fun. That being said, though, that is all the time I Locked On Blues podcast. On whatever podcast platform you're listening to me on. So the channel on YouTube, I should say, at Locked On Blues. Hit the notification bell about a new episode. So you'll be the first to know. Leave a comment, react and stuff. I have a lot of fun doing that. It's a good way to engage with you guys and get suggestions from you guys, but also various podcast platforms. That's totally fine too. Leave a review on there if you're feeling so kind. Follow us. The channel's various socials: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. You could follow me at Josh. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, let's go Blues.